Hey friends, welcome to Just Call Me Viv. Grab a coffee, pull up a chair, and let's talk. Hey friends, welcome back to Just Call Me Viv. I'm really excited about today's guest. She is someone that I have known for 20 plus something years, for a very long time. Maribel Lara, who is the founder of Beget Love Consulting. She's not only a friend, but someone that, as I mentioned, we go way back. We go way back to our days at Tufts University, back in a time where we were both trying to figure out who we were. And watching her, watching you, Mari, build this career over time has honestly been a masterclass for me in patience, confidence.
I'm a Fiona. You're gonna cry already.
No, and tenacity, I think, especially as a Latina, right? You're an example to me. And as a woman in spaces that don't always make room for us. Latina, I mean, it's just amazing. So I'm struck by your career path and your trajectory because I know that's not where you started. So it's, a lot of your evolution over time. And I know that my daughter got to meet you when she was younger and she did her elevator pitch back when she had her little journal. And I thought that was an inspiration, right? And I thought about how do you brand yourself as a person aside from who you are as an individual? How do you create your own brand and you leave your legacy? And so that was something that impacted my young daughter, right? So you're already serving as an example to young girls who are maybe haven't figured out what path they're taking in life, but also to the woman who feels like she's stuck. You went on your own solo just this past winter in 2025. So I think that's just all amazing. And I want other people to hear your story, other Latinas, other women in transition, in midlife, a young woman out there who needs some inspiration. I'm so excited and happy to have you here. Let's see, how did being a Latina shape the way that you moved through your early career spaces? And I know you were a blogger for some time, but especially as you moved from, and give us some insight as to where you started in higher ed. You had your blog and then moving in marketing and in these tech forward environments.
Yeah, I can't remember a point in my life where being Latina wasn't front and center, right? My parents came from Latin American countries. My mom came from Peru. My dad came from Chile. That was front and center in my life, right? Like Spanish was spoken in our households. Like we consumed Spanish language media in addition to English media. A lot of my friends in school also came from Latin American countries, like all diasporas of Latin America, because I had the privilege of growing up in New York City. I grew up in a city where being from different countries was celebrated. And so being Latina was something that was part and parcel of who I was. And there were examples of that everywhere. And I think that's really important. When I went to Tufts, which is where we met, and I'm gonna blow up your spot because you're like 20 something years ago. I'm like, I'm 48 years old. I was 18 years old when we met, Viv. So like we're going on 30 years of knowing each other,
Yes.
right? Like, so when people are just like when you say like you talk about the role of like being Latina and what that played, Tufts was the first place where, like, I met people that didn't identify with an ethnicity, right? And so, like, and I think that's just part of being a New York City kid. Like, being a New York City kid, like, you don't you identify, like, as the neighborhood that you're from. Sometimes, like, where you grew up, like, specifically, like, I was not just a kid from the projects, I was a kid from, like, the Elliott houses, right? Like, I represented a specific projects, like not just the projects. Elliott houses told you what neighborhood specifically, and even like the streets and avenues that I grew up in. And then you also talked about like where your family was from, right? The assumption was that I would be Puerto Rican or Dominican because I was from New York City, but I was South American. I was Peruvian and Chilean. And so you led with that, right? Like all of these were things that gave people a sense of who you were, what your identity was, like what you grew up around before, like it was foundational to getting to know someone. And Tufts was the first place where, like, I met people that didn't identify in that way, and that was a real, like, shock, and it was a way of, like, getting to know people, and so it was not surprising that the way that I built community at Tufts was finding other people who, like me, utilized ethnicity and race as a way of, like, introduction and foundation of, like, who are you? And, like, do we have things in common? And is there a way here for us to be in community? And that's how we met, right? Like you had already been there, but we had shared communities, right? La Casa, like mentorship. It was the student organizations, right? And a variety of it was Essence, our singing group, right? Like it was all
Yeah.
these places where folks who came from communities like the ones that we grew up in came together. And honestly, it was also like that wasn't just about, like, people who look like us and grew up in places like us, but it was also people who tapped into culture the way that we did. It was also people who looked for creative outlets the way that we looked for them, right? And all of that was part of who I became as an individual, right? Like, it wasn't just the things that we learned in the classroom. I didn't take any advertising classes. I didn't take any business classes. Tufts was a liberal arts, engineering, right? And really like medical school. Like that's what you went there for. So business was not part of what you went to Tufts to study. So fast forward, being Latina was part of what sort of guided me through every career. Higher education was the first area that I explored, and I landed on higher education because a sorority sister of ours, right, who was years ahead of us, I met her. She was looking at careers in higher education, and it piqued my interest. And the thing that I saw was the opportunity to be the person that I felt was lacking in my college experience. As a young Latina at a predominantly white university, I only saw adult Latinos in the Spanish and Latin American Studies department, right? Like teaching in Spanish. And I was like, why don't I see administrators that look like us? Why don't I see somebody who works in the financial aid department? Why don't I see somebody who works in alumni affairs? Why don't I see a dean that looks like me and that can understand my experience? And I really felt that I would have sought more support if I thought that somebody would understand my experience. But on the contrary, I was already feeling a stereotype. And the things we heard all the time were that we didn't belong in those rooms because we didn't earn our place there, right? Like we had
Right.
this constant, like, you filled a quota, is what
Right.
we
Right.
heard constantly. And when that is the thing you hear constantly, you're on this mission to prove them wrong. And in that on that mission to prove them wrong, you're like, I'm not asking for help, which
Right.
is like lovely. But because of that, a lot of people that look for like us, and we know some of these people, don't ask for help. And they end up failing out because they didn't seek out the support that did exist. Right. And so, and like if I'm honest, like I got close, right? I managed to do it, but like and it's because I eventually did ask for help, right? And so I wanted to be a support person in the system to help people ask for help sooner so that more people that looked like me would ask for help sooner. And I really felt like I did that. I felt like I did that for 8 years because it was not surprising that like I had Latinas and young Latinos come into my office and be like, hey, who are you? And where do you come from? Because you kind of look like me. Right? Like it just is. Like we tend to be like, can I try like you look like a person I might be able to trust. Like it just is. It's just like an immediate opportunity to explore, and that was such gratifying work, and I'm so glad that I did that, and I learned so much about leadership development and just like how we formulate like teams and how we formulate like the things that we want to do, like just all sorts of development which is applicable in anything that you want to do, and I took with me into the business world. I most importantly, like, learned who I wanted to be and, like, what I wanted to be when I grew up. I think the thing I learned is that you don't have to have it figured out at 18. I think most people don't. I learned that it was okay to figure it out at 30 years old and decide at 30 that, like, I did have a knack for this thing called marketing and communications, and that it was okay at 30 to decide to go back to school and explore something completely different and try something that felt a little hard, and start all over again from scratch because life is long. And that's how I ended up in marketing.
That's beautiful. You spoke about just being an example, right, in education, and that I think for many of us, especially in institutions like Tufts University, there's this shame around asking for help. And you had to do everything on your own. I never went to get extra help. I never saw or met with my advisor. I don't think that my advisor even had the approach of really extending themselves or doing some outreach to connect with me. I think if we met, it was just to sign sort of my slip to get the course selections that I wanted. And that was about it. And so I think in many ways, you and I sort of led similar paths in that I wanted to be in spaces where other younger Latinos who, especially in educational settings, saw themselves in someone working at those institutions and someone who would guide them and offer support. And that's in many ways how I also ended up in education. I didn't start in education, and that's where I am currently. So I appreciate hearing that part of your journey. And I wonder too, Mari, if there were times early on, even when you were in higher ed, where you felt like you had to translate yourself or your ideas or your instincts for others to take you seriously.
I guess yes. But the other thing you know about me is no tengo pelo en la lengua. Like, I'm
I know.
kind like, right? Like, I'm very direct. And I guess my gift is I'm able to be very direct without being rude, right? Like, you can tell that I'm like frustrated. I can tell you really clear, like, I can be really direct without like cursing or being like stereotypical Latina.
Right, right,
Right?
right,
Like, you're gonna have it in other words, like, I'm really good at being beyond reproach in my directness. Let's
right.
that's how we'll phrase it. I remember having 2 really clear conversations. I've had several, right? I lost my patience once in higher education with, like, over time with somebody who was not my direct manager, but was at a higher, right, like, more senior than I was, and I felt was being unfair with me, and I felt like was, just yeah, had it out for me in essence, and I started pushing back, and it got to a point where, like, somebody more senior had to intervene. And literally, like, I had my managers changed, and I like, the management structure was changed so that I reported into, like, the head of the department and, like, skipped 2 levels. So, basically, I didn't have to deal with folks, and what I was told was kind of like, "Listen, you're right. You're right," right? Like, they have it out for you, and it's because they're intimidated by you. But guess what, kid? You're gonna deal with that the rest of your career, right? And it's funny because fast forward, that was like in the first few years of my professional career. I actually texted that that person a few months ago. And I was like, it's funny because you said that to me, and it's probably been like 25 years. And that has held true throughout my career. And I was just like, and I just wanted to thank you for being honest with me and preparing me that despite the fact that it was uncomfortable, it was what I needed to be ready to deal with throughout my career. And so, like, I think that it happens because I'm Latina and sometimes people expect me to stay in my place. I think that it happens because I'm a woman and people expect me sometimes to stay in my place. And so I don't know that it's necessarily that I feel like I have to like translate for myself. as much as that it is that people have expectations of me that I think often are lower than what my reality is, right? I think that I often surpass what their expectations are, and they have a hard time dealing with it, but that's their problem, not mine, right? That, however, often will translate into them treating me a certain way that when that treatment initially happens, you're caught off guard. It
Yeah.
is not a nice feeling. And so what I have had to learn to practice, and it's a consistent practice, is like, I don't need to react in this moment.
Right.
Right? I don't need to react in this moment. So I have over the years gotten better at being like, I don't actually need to say anything right now. And actually, like, silence is my friend. And being able to say things like, you've given me a lot to process. I'd like to take some time to do just that. And then walking away and going through my rage and going through my process
Yeah.
on my
Yeah.
own and not giving someone like like the satisfaction of seeing me go through that. And then also learning that, all of the things that I want to say, I don't actually have to say to that person. Like I can go
Right.
through all of that on my own and I can just go back to them with, like, the simplest thing and the satisfaction of, like, that may actually frustrate the shit out of them, and that's okay, right? But, like, that did not like, that was not me at 25, that was not me at 35, that is not at 45 and 48, that's much closer to who that is, but it has been a lifetime of professional practice of getting
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think I've had those moments too early on in my career, especially where I started. I started in CPS and I became a supervisor relatively young, and people questioning me, my authority or my leadership, and saying that I was simply promoted because I was a Latina and I was meeting the quota, the diversity quota, and failing to see my experience and my credentials. And so they couldn't see beyond my, identity as a Latina and saw that as sort of the thing that got me the job. And I think even in, I would say in my 30s, it's something that persisted. And it brings me to this point in where you've just been able to show how your endurance, right? And it goes back to your endurance and your tenacity and being patient and quiet. You mentioned silence, but being quiet when you needed to be. That doesn't happen overnight, right? It's something you grow into. Just like you didn't build your career overnight, you built it over years, even having a moment in your life where you pivoted. What kept you going during the seasons where your growth, right, felt slow or invisible?
I think each day, right, like each year, I personally feel really strongly about celebrating the small wins. I shared on LinkedIn several months ago how passionate I am about saving thank you notes and forwarding to myself notes that I get from people, annual reviews, anytime I've received a promotion, right, or there's been something nice said about me, or I was written up in a newsletter or I was in a podcast. Like anytime there was like some sense of accomplishment, I've always forwarded those from my professional account to my personal account to save them. And then I go back every once in a while and I read those. And so there's a lot that happens that gets lost because we get hyper focused on the big rocks, the big accomplishments that we're looking to achieve, that we neglect all of the little things that were foundational to getting the big thing done. Right? Like there are big clients that sure are critical in me achieving big goals for my company, but there were little things that were critical in some of those bigger clients eventually like coming my way. And so
Right.
you can't neglect the little things, or you can, but if you do, it makes it feel like a much harder road than it actually is. So I think employing a practice of reflecting back and celebrating all of those little wins and recognizing that that is not selfish, right? Like
No.
that's not a bad thing. And going back to bringing this back to being Latina, we are not taught to celebrate those little things, right? Like we are, while maybe not directly, but like we're taught that that's a bad thing. Like that's bragging, and bragging is a bad thing. We're not supposed to do that. I had to be taught to do that. And I was taught by a recruiter. When I wasn't. I was working with a recruiter when I left my first media agency. So the career search that led me to VaynerMedia, I met with a recruiter who was recommended by a colleague and shared with her, right? She looked at my LinkedIn, I shared my resume with her, and I had a call with her. And she just asked me a bunch of questions. And she was like, Maribel, she was just like, you're phenomenal. She was like, your resume sucks. It's like, wow. And she was just like, you really suck at talking about yourself on paper. You've done all of these amazing things. And she was like, you don't know how to reflect to them. And she was like, I have homework for you. You need to go and you need to read this book. And it's a book called Brag, the Art of Tooting Your Own Horn. And I think it's Peggy McGuire. Might be messing that up. But it is called Brag, the Art of Tooting Your Own Horn. And I recommend it to everybody. It's an old read at this point. But she basically talks about how women, and she does talk about how like women of color in particular are not taught to talk about their accomplishments. We're taught to like brush them aside because we are taught to like stay in the shadows. We are taught and we are raised to support, not to be in the spotlight. And that holds us back. Men are taught to brag. Men are taught to talk about their accomplishments. Men are taught to embellish their accomplishments and to take the spotlight, even if they shouldn't be taking the spotlight. So it's like complete opposites in terms of like how genders are, right, like raised. And so there's a real need for women, and I think especially for women of color, to do that. And I had to be taught how to do it. And it's a consistent practice, and I've gotten better, and my career has gotten better. And I wouldn't have been able, like, starting my own business wasn't about learning certain things. It was actually about being ready to step into the spotlight and feeling like I had embraced like what I had actually done. It wasn't about learning something. Like I knew how to do all of the things that I'm currently doing probably for a while. It was about like I believe it.
You talked about consistency, but also stepping into the limelight, right? Owning sort of your power.
Yes.
And that's hard as a Latina, but also like you worked with some like big people in the industry,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. And I would say it's not the proximity of power, it's your talent. It's what you have to offer
Mhm.
those organizations, and working with leaders as the ones you've worked with. It gives you, as a Latina, as a woman, this front row seat to where the big decision making sort of happens. And what did you learn about your own leadership by watching this up close with some of the people that you've worked with?
I learned that at the beginning, I was still looking for permission, right? I was still like, I would formulate a plan and I would formulate like a path, but I was still looking for like the stamp of approval. And so the biggest lesson was you're not always going to get that. And if you're at the top, that doesn't exist. Right? Like
Yeah.
the person at the top has to just go.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
leap of faith. That was the biggest lesson. When I got to work directly for Gary as part of the office of the CEO, which was like a shared chief of staff role, you would text him and be like, okay, you want me to do blah, blah, blah on this thing. And sometimes you wouldn't get a response. That didn't mean that you didn't do anything until you heard from him. It just meant you had to do, right? Like you had to go and you had to act because he was busy, because there were probably 50 things that were more important than that specific thing. So you just had to act and you had to trust in yourself and trust in your plan. And so that was definitely the most powerful lesson. Was leadership is a leap of faith. Probably 99% of the time it is acting without having a clear path or a stamp of approval.
Yeah. That's amazing. I mean, were there, even in those spaces, were there parts of yourself that you felt like you had to stretch early on in your career? And what parts or aspects of yourself, your identity, did you refuse to shrink, especially in those high pressure environments where you're now in the leadership position and you have to make some decisions?
Yeah, having to be right. I am stubborn. Another very big learning from Gary was rather than having to be right, learning to be that being historically correct was sufficient. Meaning saying what I had to say, right? Stating my opinion and being comfortable with the fact that the client might decide to go down a different path, accepting that and supporting them on the path that they chose, right? Like, I'm gonna leave. Okay, fine. You decided to not do it the way that I had suggested. We're gonna leave that there. I'm not right, like, no ill will, no bad feelings. I'm gonna be like the best support you've ever had. And if it doesn't work out, I'm also not gonna rub it in your face. Right? That was a really big shift because that impacts then how you work with your client and impacts your client relationship. It means much better client relationships. And I think part of that was youth, right? Like it's again, like the things you learn over time and not having been in a that was a huge very different client, like very different dynamic of working with students for the first decade of my career versus working with clients and Fortune 500 clients at that in the second stage, like, that was a very significant learning and a really important one.
Wow. After having such a beautiful career, working for others, how did you know that it was time for you to start building or stop building for someone else and building something for yourself, something of your own?
Yeah, I was hyper focused on the work that I wanted to do. I had we okay, so I helped to launch the Sasha Group in 2019. So the Sasha Group was a separate agency that Gary Vaynerchuk owned under the VaynerX umbrella. It was named after his father, Sasha Vaynerchuk, and the Sasha Group was meant to serve small to mid-market businesses as both a consultancy and an agency. So the whole idea was VaynerMedia works with Fortune 500 companies, and there are smaller companies who would like to be able to work with Gary and his people. They're not big enough for VaynerMedia. VaynerMedia is not built for them. So what if we created this other company that could work with them, the small ones, in a consulting capacity, and as they got bigger, then they could work with the same Sasha Group in a retainer capacity, and then they would graduate and they would become VaynerMedia clients. My job was to work with the smallest ones on the consulting side. So my job was to build consulting offerings. We built advisory services and like project-based consulting offerings, basically like building strategy, like how can we give them access to the type of intelligence and research they would typically only get with an expensive agency and set them up to then be able to do the rest on their own, right? Until they're at a point where they're making enough money that it makes sense that they can then work with us in an agency capacity. I learned really quickly that I loved working with entrepreneurs. I loved working with small businesses because I have an MBA. I don't just have a master's in marketing. So I love business, not just the marketing aspect of it. And so working with small companies means you have your hands in everything because now you're talking about like, okay, how are you communicating with your clients throughout the consumer journey? Not just what's the social media post going to be, right? Like it's also conversations about like who are the first people you're going to hire, what is the hiring like? What does that position look like? What are they doing? How are they interacting with like, it's you have your hand it's impossible to separate marketing and communications from every other element of running the business, and I loved that. I loved that I could, like, dabble and have conversation. And not only that, but I was working with the founders. That's really different than working with Fortune 500 companies. Like, you're working with a brand manager, and there are, like, tons of brand managers because it's this massive portfolio company. I was, like, in the weeds with these founders. The stakes are way higher, and I really liked that, right? Like, I don't know, call me a glutton for, like, punishment and risk, but I really liked that. So, like, you back in I was actually doing that work starting in 2017. And it's why I became part of the founding leadership team at 2019. So we were dabbling with consulting for small and mid-market businesses before we started Sasha Group, and that's why those services became part of the Sasha Group. So I had actually gone to Gary and I was like, if you want to keep doing this stuff, like I want to keep doing it. So like please keep me in mind. I actually raised my hand and said, like, this work lights me up. And if you want to keep doing it, like I'm your girl, right? So if there's a lesson for your readers, it's like when you find the thing that lights you up, make sure everybody who needs to know knows so that they're keeping their ears on the ground for to match you with those opportunities. So don't keep it a secret. When you find the thing that lights you up, like let the world know. That's what I did and that's why I got on this path. So I've known for a long time that this is who I wanted to work with. Now, you have to pay attention to everything that's happening. Sasha Group is not my company. It's Gary's company. I know what Gary's overall ambitions are, right? And so I just kept watching what was happening with VaynerX overall. And I was like, and I worked for Gary, right? Like I also knew that Gary at some point had ambitions for what is called a conflict shop. So in the advertising world, you have an agency like VaynerMedia. VaynerMedia has a big client. They have PepsiCo as a client. That means they can't work with Coca-Cola because Coca-Cola is their number one competitor. In the agency world, the biggest agencies have what's called a conflict shop, right? So you have a holding company, VaynerX, and they have multiple agencies so that they can work with competitors. So typically speaking, a VaynerX would have a VaynerMedia that works with PepsiCo, and they might have another company that can work with Coca-Cola, completely different staffs, P&Ls, etc. Gary didn't have that, but he kind of had the possibility of that with Sasha Group. And so I saw Sasha Group's clients on the agency side kept getting bigger and bigger. And the ask of me on the consulting side was that my clients kept getting bigger and bigger. And so my consulting offerings kept moving away from the smaller clients. And I, in my mind, knew that at some point I would need to make a decision that if we kept moving away from the small clients, we were going to be moving away from the clients I really wanted to be working with. And I was going to have to make a decision as to whether I would stay because the company and the culture were more important to me, or if I left because the client and that type of work was more important to me. And I had made the decision several years ago that the client size and the type of work was more important to me, and that I had been at Vayner long enough that I knew that I would continue to have the relationships and that Gary and I would always have the relationship. And so I was just waiting for the right time, and the right time came.
That's awesome. I mean, I think what speaks to me is this: it's relational, right? The work that you do is relational. And working with the smaller businesses, you build those relationships, right? With the founders, with the people that you wouldn't necessarily interact with like the larger companies, right?
Mhm.
The larger clients. So again, it's not surprising. This is who you are, right? This is, you build relationships. Relationships are important to you. And it makes sense why you chose the name you chose for your firm. So I guess starting my question, or I'm assuming that starting your own firm isn't just a business move for you, but it's also an identity shift in the work that you do. What surprised you most about becoming the founder? And what was the intention, again, how you named your company?
Interestingly, the name is actually a name that I've been sitting on for several years. You mentioned that I was a blogger at one point, because I was. I actually came up with this name. I thought it was going to be a blog, probably in 2018, I think, because I had the logo made back then too. So I actually thought it was going to be, Substack, I don't think was around back then, but it was going to be writing. It was going to be an outlet for writing about how, like, everything that you do should be because it ties back to something you love. And all of that tied back to the fact that I lost my parents in back-to-back years when I was 30 and 31 years old. 31 and 32 years old. And that really changed my perspective on life. They were both in their early 60s, which is incredibly young. I was young when I lost them. And the thing that brought me peace about their lives was that they lived and loved every single day, right? Like they traveled, they spent time with the people they loved. And like, I think that's really important. And so I have been guided by this idea that like, you should love the work that you do. It shouldn't feel like work. It should feel like an extension of you. You should love the clients that you work with, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you build something, you should build it because you're passionate about it. In fact, it will do better as a business if you're passionate about it, if you truly believe in it. And so I just have this like really strong belief that even in business, emotion is important, right? Like building authentic, emotion based relationships, like true relationships with the people you're trying to sell to. I think that that's vital. And I think that it's more vital in business landscapes that are overcrowded, as is every freaking industry today. And so it just worked really well. Like I was sitting on this name and I was like, yeah, I'm going to use that because that works really well right now. In a crowded landscape, what cuts through all of the noise is emotional connection. Love begets love, right? Like if
Yes.
you build a true emotional connection with your target customer, client, whoever it may be, that will cut through, that will resonate, that will work, and you will build a profitable business, right? Like it is okay to like make money off of something that is true.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. And you just reminded me of your mom and dad. They were just wonderful humans and so welcoming, you know, and you are just like them, right? When you decided to strike on your own, and this is something I think about because I think a lot of having something of my own and building something of my own instead of always creating and building for others. Were there any fears that showed up when you decided, okay, this is my time? And how did you work around your fears instead of letting them kind of hold you back and freeze you?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest fear was financial, right? Like not having enough money coming in to meet basic needs. And for me, the way that I face that is planning, right? So it literally was sitting down and being like, what are the bills that need to get paid? Like what are the non-negotiable? Like what is the fundamental amount of money that we need on a monthly basis to be able to do this? What do we have available, right? So, like, me and my husband sitting down and saying, like, "What do we have available? What will we sell if we need to sell something? Um, how will we bring money in if it doesn't come in through my business?" Being realistic, like, I actually planned out that there would be no revenue coming in through my business for the first 3 months. That was not realistic. Nobody knew that I was launching a business, right? So, being very realistic about expenses, about where money was coming in, about what could be sold, about who we could ask for money if we needed to ask for money. So, planning, right? Like, a wish and a prayer isn't gonna magically, like, make money appear. My husband willing to, like, go back to work, and take healthcare expenses off of my plate so that we weren't paying like, the only way that this works is planning and understanding, like, what is feasible and understanding what sacrifices you're willing to make as you figure it out. So yeah, like the finances were the biggest part of it. Yeah. So planning helps, right? Because I think you go back to so from a client perspective, right? So it's not just these are the number of clients I need to get and these are the things, right? Like I mapped out these are the services. These are the numbers of clients for each of the services that I think I will get each month. But then I also had to map out, okay, where do I think those clients are coming from? So I had to map out, okay, these are people I know who might be clients. How am I reaching out to them? What am I saying to them? And then like these are places where I might meet type type of people who could be clients. Okay, let me map where are those activities happening? How might I get there? And then like who might put me in connection with these types of people. So most of it is planning, right? So like for me, the fears are all real, but the only way that I can get over those fears is mapping out a plan to like make them to avoid the worst part coming true.
Yeah, that makes sense. And being a founder, I would say you're carrying it all, right? So planning is essential, right?
Yeah,
You're the decision maker.
there's no team to be like, "Okay," like, I used to have a team,
Yeah.
not a massive team most recently. At times, I've had massive teams, right? I've had
Yeah.
teams up to, like, 40 plus people. I've also had small teams, but I've usually been able to be like, "Okay, I need you to plan content for XYZ. I need you to, like, create a presentation." Now it's like a freaking mirror, like, "Hey, I need you to blah, blah, blah."
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so, yeah, if you're not a person who can map out a plan and actualize a plan, then I do not recommend that you become a founder.
Yeah. No, that's hard. Being a founder requires ambition. So my next question to you is, how has your relationship with ambition changed as you've gotten older?
I One is recognizing that my ambition doesn't have to look like other people's. I think that I put off entrepreneurship for some time because I thought it had to look like other people's expectations were. And I realized that other people's expectations are like to be a millionaire, to fly on private jets, to have a second home, to wear really expensive stuff. And that my expectation of it was really different, right? Like, I think that people are taken aback when I'm just like, dude, I actually was really comfortable with what my salary was. um, I would be very comfortable like making my salary where I'm still putting money away for retirement and I'm like putting some savings away and maybe working less and still able like still have disposable income to do some traveling throughout the year. I'm not interested in brand names. Like, I like buying secondhand and I'm super comfortable doing that. I like cooking at home. I don't need to eat out all the time. Like, I actually really like living that life. Like, I am actually not interested in working like a dog to buy shit that I don't need. So, yeah. So, like, I am comfortable with my portrait of ambition.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. I think, and as we get older, especially you being the founder, you get to define that for yourself.
Yes.
So I guess my next question is, what does sustainable success look like to you, not just professionally, but emotionally?
Yeah, I think it's funny. I think sustainable success is you love what you do so much that you don't actually think about retirement. I think that if you're like thinking about retirement it's because what you do exhausts you so much or
Mm-hmm.
leaves you so little time to do the things you actually love to do that you're just so hungry for time back. I say instead, create a life where your time goes to things you love. Make sure
Absolutely.
design work that you enjoy and have that be your sustained life. Like I think that is sustained success. I don't ever want to retire. Like I want to keep doing this type of work that I'm doing however it evolves for as long as I have breath in my body. I think that I think that the Japanese have it right? Like, the Japanese believe that the work that they do is their life's purpose, and they do it until they die because it is their life's purpose. Like, I believe that I have found work that is my life's purpose, and I do believe that it will evolve over time because my experience will evolve, because my clients will evolve. Like, I have been like, my life is an evolution, and so I think it will continue to do that, but I think I have found who right? Like, I want and how I wanna continue to work with people, so I'm just gonna keep doing that, and I'm gonna keep finding ways to integrate the other things that I love to do, and, like, that is sustainable success.
I love that. So how do you think you've always been such a great storyteller, even from our time when we were like young, we were turned to Mari for the ideas on when we had to create something. So how do you think that being a Latina positions you to, uniquely understand audience, culture, and storytelling, especially in marketing, especially for young women out there who's interested, perhaps in this career, or who's trying to create her own brand, her own company, hang her shingle.
Yeah.
How do you think that as Latinas we're uniquely poised to do that in a different way?
I love this question, and I hadn't thought about it before, but the answers came to me really quickly. One is, I think, music. I have always thought that Latino music, especially the kind of music that we grew up on, tells a story like no other, right? Like, you go back to some of these, like, salsa songs from,
Yes.
like, you know, from our era, from our parents' era. They
Yes.
told stories. These were
Mhm.
narratives. Like, you sat down and, like, you listened to it. And not to say that that doesn't happen anymore. Like, I actually think Taylor Swift is really gifted at doing that, like, telling a
Yes.
story through some of, like, so I do think that there are some really, like, phenomenal, like, songwriting storytellers still in existence, and they will always do, but, like, Latino music in particular, I think, has had a real gift in doing that. So, if you listened to Spanish language music growing up, I think that that was one way that storytelling was always part of it. My mom was a massive listener of music, like Saturdays in particular, cleaning day, there was always
Yes.
music, right? So, like, I think the osmosis of just constantly listening to stories being told, that was just always around. And I think the other is chisme,
Yes.
right? Like, I mean, right, like gossip for those who don't speak
Yes.
Spanish. But I think that we grew up with TVs off, sitting around tables or sitting around living rooms or sitting in bedrooms with just stories being told.
Mhm.
And sure, with this moniker of gossip, but, like, I still love that is still the thing that I love about getting together with my family, is just
Yes.
sitting in a group and being like, "Do you remember?"
Yes.
Right, like, and the colorful details, and, like, she had a dress, and she loved wearing that dress because la, 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 right? And so, like, that transference of history and, like, roots through storytelling, which we call bochinche or chisme,
See?
right? Like, but it is very natural to our culture. And so I do think that there is something very inherent in being Latina, Latinx, Latine, that it is like it's just inside us. Like, being a storyteller comes very naturally to us. And I lean into it.
Yeah. I mean, we grew up, right, watching the Spanish language networks, right, where we would sit for 3 hours with our parents watching the evening show and then the novelas, right?
Yeah.
It was all centered on storytelling and then, "Did you
This
see what
amazing
fulana
gift of
did?"
taking something that could be said in 5 minutes and extending it into, like, months.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, and we would sit, like, glued and tuned in because it was so interesting, and
Mhm.
it's something that I think I miss about how we were raised and how, because we don't have that anymore. I don't sit around the TV with my daughter watching telenovelas, right, and seeing I did, like, a little skit recently on TikTok making fun of a novela, and my daughter didn't get it. She didn't get the context, and I'm like, "Oh, we've missed an opportunity here with, like, this generation."
Well, you know what's crazy is I just saw, an Instagram reel, and I'm gonna include it in my newsletter, so you're getting a sneak peek on the next newsletter. It was actually about rom-coms and looking at the number of rom-coms in the 80s and 90s, and how that number has significantly gone down, and how it coincides with the marriage rate and childbirth rate going down. And it's just like, and, obviously not robust research, and so you can't, like, directly correlate them, but really talking about, like, the role that rom-coms play in just teaching people basic acts of socialization, right? Like, just you introduce yourself to somebody. How do you ask somebody on a date? Like, how do you get to know someone? And when you don't tell those kinds of stories, right? Like, you don't provide examples of that, like, then how do we learn? right? Like when then the only examples you do have are negative examples for people
Yeah,
to reference. So I do think that there's something to it. So we need more people to continue to tell positive stories.
agreed. Agreed. What kind of legacy are you building now? Not just in your work, but in your life and the way you live.
I think one of simplicity, like one of it's interesting. Again, I kind of go back, everything interrelates, right? Like a lot of the wellness trends for 2026 are about like simplicity and quiet and going back to basics. And I feel like that fits what I'm building really strongly, in that I feel like I'm really battling this sense of what it's supposed to be like to be an entrepreneur, that it has to be this like burnout hustle. And I'm like, that's not what I want to do. Like, I actually wanted to be an entrepreneur because I wanted to own more of my time. I wanted to
Yes.
like work less. I wanted to like do more nurturing thing. I wanted to take better care of myself. So yeah, so like for me it's about more like inward. And so I want my legacy to be one that like entrepreneurship can be one of self-nurturing, and you can build something for yourself, and I think that's what entrepreneurship should be. Like, you should build it for yourself. And if building for yourself means you wanna build something that's bigger because you wanna impact more people, and impacting more people means, like, building something that's bigger because you wanna be able to hire more people, or building something that's bigger because you're trying to transform your town, right, or your county, or your city, and that's the legacy you wanna leave, that's cool. But build it for you, like, build it because, like, that's the legacy you wanna leave. Like, the legacy I wanna leave, for me, the legacy I wanna leave for my niece is, like, for her to be happy in her life, and that her being happy, like, shouldn't be about anybody else, like, checking boxes
Right.
for anybody else.
Wow. That's beautiful. What's one small, grounded move a woman can make this year in her life if she's standing at the edge of building something like you have, or reinventing herself, or maybe making a career pivot?
That it doesn't have to be big, right? Like, essentially, to redefine what big is, we look at, right, like, we look at like people who have millions of followers, hundreds of thousands of followers on social, because those are the examples that are put in front of us. But I know that for my little business, I had 20 plus clients last year. And if I had 50 clients this year, that would be massive. So why do I need to be chasing hundreds of thousands of followers? I don't need hundreds of thousands of people for my business. I just
Right.
need to get in front of the right people. So
Yep.
I think it's like figuring out what big is for you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It sort of goes back to like build for you, figure out what big would be for you, as opposed to like what society and social is telling you big is supposed to be.
That was beautiful. I think, for me, embarking on this journey, even starting this podcast, was an act of courage, because I think for me, just putting myself out there, not only people hearing my voice, but also visually seeing me. And for many, many years, there was a lot of self doubt, a lot of fear. And I think playing it small. And I go back to what I'm naturally good at, which is listening and advising. It's not surprising, right? I ended up becoming a therapist and a lawyer, right? I think I've always been that one person, that one friend people come to talk to, seeking advice, knowing that I'm like, you can share anything with me and I'm going to keep it shut and tight lipped. So I think for me, as I love hearing that. I don't have to be, my plan for how I live and my success doesn't have to match anyone else's, but it's something that I have to create from a place that a true belief in my capacity and my abilities, but also a trust. And I think that's innate in all of us. Looking back to 22-year-old Mari after we finished, at Tufts, and you look back at the woman that you were at 22 and the woman that you are today, what do you feel most proud of? And what are you holding on to from what you've known and learned in your trajectory? And just maturing and growing.
I'm gonna cry. Like 22-year-old me didn't know how to let go. Like even, yeah, 22-year-old me like held on to a lot of stuff. I mean, even 40-year-old me still held on to a lot of stuff. So the thing I am most proud of is not internalizing what was about other people and learning what it truly meant to let go, right?
Yeah.
Like I was confused about what that really meant, right? Like, I thought I understood what not caring was. I didn't, because I thought I didn't care, but I was still caring, and that eats at you, and you don't find peace until you really figure out what letting go really means and what it really feels like in your body, and so having done that work was really important, and I'm so proud of that. And that's, like, that was, like, huge. Learning to ask for help, which is right, like, we talked about how that was a very big part of why I wanted to go into higher education, but it didn't mean that I had really learned that lesson. Like, I asked in desperation, and that's what finally got me through college, right? Like, I
Yeah.
desperation, I finally went to meet my dean, um,
Yep. Yep.
and that's why I got through my senior year, and I wish that I had met my dean sooner. But I got to that point again when my dad passed away, right? Like, and I desperately needed help. And I asked again in a state of desperation. I have since learned to ask for help before being in a state of desperation. And so I think that that is another huge life lesson. And I'm proud of myself for realizing that recognizing the potential need for help is not a weakness, but really, it's the smartest thing that you can do, right? Like,
Hmm.
that's strategic. To
Hmm.
be able to anticipate where you might need help is strategic.
Yes.
To
Yes.
to reach out to people in advance and say, "I'm doing this. I might need your help. Should I need your help, would you be willing to offer your help?" Is
Yes.
smart, right? And then also lets you know who's got your back and who doesn't have your back before you're in a point of desperation and vulnerability. So I think that, like, that's another one that I'm really proud of, that I'm at a point and like, hey, I'm only 48 years old. There's still hopefully a lot of life left to live. And so I will take those lessons with me.
Thank you for sharing that. No, that resonates so much with me because I think, especially as women, we're conditioned to believe that we have to do everything ourselves. And letting go of that belief that we have to be all things to everyone. It's hard to do, but I think that lesson is only learned through growth and the challenges and the ups and downs of just living and being a woman. And I would say that for me, that came probably like in my mid 40s. I was going through a time where there were a lot of changes and also really wrapped up in my identity as a parent that I had forgotten who I was. I didn't know how to say no. I wasn't good at setting boundaries and I was really good at people pleasing. Right. And I've learned to be more direct and let go of having or seeking that approval from others. So I think that's important for younger women to hear, for anyone to hear, but also women in transition, right? There's so much living left for us. There's so many women out there who started building businesses and building careers after 50. And so I take that as inspiration. I take you as inspiration. You started this wonderful firm and like you decided to branch on out on your own and do this. And, for me, fear has kept me stuck, right? Like, and so seeing you as an example is again, not only inspiration, but sort of like the fire that I think not only myself, but other women need to start that project, to take that next leap of faith to doing what their life's purpose, what they're passionate about. So I'm just grateful that you gave me this opportunity because, again, I built something and I'm like, I need to get out of my shell and ask. ask for help and reaching out to my network. And I'm just grateful that you agreed to sit for this interview. I'm just honored that you held some space for me today. So thank you
I
so
it
much.
it was I didn't even have to think about it. Like I said, I was so happy to support you, to be able to have this, like, conversation with you, because I'm so happy to see you stepping into the spotlight and having conversations. Yay, and I can't wait to see what other interviews you're gonna have on here. You're gonna find many, many people like me who won't hesitate to say yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mari. Any parting words for the one listening out there?
I just wanna reiterate to stop listening to other people and, like, listen to yourself and build for yourself. There are as many opinions as there are people, and the only one that really matters is yours.
Thank you, Mari. Well, I hope everyone has enjoyed today's episode. If you liked today's episode, I'd like you to like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, take care of yourselves. Bye.